Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of teissTalk with me, your host, Jenny Radcliffe. And on a day when half the internet is playing up, we've got a great show for you. Later, I'm joined by two guests from an amazing panel. We have Sebastian Avavare, who's the Information Security Manager at Canon, and Jason Sirocco, who's the CTO of PKI at Sectorgo, who are also sponsoring our show today. We are going to be talking all about zero trust, digital identities, and our news item is going to be that open letter from the White House to all those organizations in America about ransomware. But first, I want to say welcome to my lead guest, who I'm going to be interviewing. I'm so excited to be interviewing her. She is Sarah Armstrong-Smith, Chief Security Advisor at Microsoft and a friend of the show. Welcome to the show, Sarah. How are you?
Very well, Jenny. I'm great to be back again in the hot seat.
Glad that we're all in the hot seat this time, because now I get to actually grill you. And can I just say to everybody, just say to all of our audience there that you can still propose questions to me and to all the panel on any of our topics today in the Q&A panel. We are on a new platform, so bear with me if I break the platform, the internet, and Sarah in the meantime. Sarah, do you know what? It's lovely to speak to you and finally interview you. Let's start with some initial thoughts. I just wondered, work-wise, and just from a security perspective, we're about to kind of hopefully return to hybrid work. What are your thoughts? What are you seeing at the moment? How's it feel at Microsoft and at your desk? I can't imagine you're not busy.
Well, yeah, it's fair to say. I mean, I started at Microsoft 1 week after the UK went into lockdown. So this has been my life, literally, in this room. So yeah, it's been really interesting actually being Microsoft, because I think we had a triple whammy. So we had to keep Microsoft up, then all our customers, and then over the last sort of year, 18 months, there's been a massive influx for digital transformation, in particular teams, collaboration sites, all of those type of things. But as you sort of said, no, we're sort of hybrid remote working is here to stay, really. And I think it's sort of fair to say, beginning of the pandemic, no one really thought this was going to last as long as it has. No. And arguably, there's not really an end in sight. I know in the UK, we're talking about coming out of lockdown. Maybe we've jumped the gun a bit early with the Indian variant and, everything else that's going on. But I think it's fair to say it's really just brought everything to the forefront with regards to security, but also business continuity and how everybody and everything is digitally connected to each other. And as you sort of said, what a great way to advertise the show this morning or today with the internet going down in some areas.
Well, do you know what? We are live, and I think that gives teissTalk a little bit of an edge because we can kind of run with it. But on the other hand, we do run the risk of everything just going off in the middle of the show. You mentioned business continuity there, Sarah, and it's something I wanted to ask you about ever since I kind of got to know you and your profile, because your beginnings in the industry were all to do with the Millennium Bug, weren't they? And can you talk to me a little bit about what that was like? And did you think at the time you were in business continuity and that 20 years later you were still going to be looking at business continuity?
No. I mean, at the time I was working for Thames Water, and I was actually working as a project coordinator. And I have a terrible habit of volunteering for things that I don't really know what I'm volunteering for. I just kind of think, well, never mind, I'll have a go. So I was asked to volunteer for this project, this Millennium Programme project. And my original role was to look at what tests had to be done on the stroke of midnight and those type of things on all the IT systems. But being a water utility company, they're actually one of the most heavily regulated of all, utility companies. So it just got me thinking, it's like, well, we're testing the IT systems, but what if the network goes down? What if people can't ring into the call center? What if you can't get water? We've got special needs customers. And I was just kind of asking all these what if questions and how do we even get people to work? And I didn't even know that business continuity was a subject. It just felt to me like common sense. And I always kind of say that was the start of my career. So this tech career, business continuity, and then over the last 20 years, that has sort of morphed in from business continuity to disaster recovery, cybersecurity, privacy, and then obviously morphed into the whole of that is resilience. So it's been quite an interesting journey, let's say.
I bet it has. And I mean, the thing that I always think about with the business continuity people who I know who've got expertise, and that is, you first of all, Millennium Bug, everyone goes, oh, it was a damn script, but a lot of hard work went into it. I mean, just shouts out to Pat Vella, who said to me, oh no, that was because a lot of people did a lot of things to make sure it didn't go wrong. But now you get to sort of 2020 and we have the pandemic. And I mean, it just must have felt like, in some ways, does it feel almost like, well, this is what we've all been preparing for. This is the real thing. Like we've diverted so many other things, or was it just sort of right? We knew it.
Well, I think it's fair to say we've been here before. We were here 10 years ago with the swine flu pandemic. So I think a lot of these major incidents and crises, they have their variants of things we've seen before. So, I mean, I think, we hear a lot of people talking about black swan events like 9/11, and global pandemic, other things like that, on the pretense that it's so big, you could never have predicted it. But you can predict it because this is, like you say, it's all variants of things we've seen before. And particularly, we talk about the Spanish flu over 100 years ago. And this is not going to be the last massive global pandemic we're going to see. No. So, and I was just sort of thinking, but from a business continuity perspective, you always talk about what's the worst case scenario. And for some companies, this may well be the worst case scenario. But I always think, even when we talk about worst cases, I don't think anyone really goes to the nth degree of the actual worst case scenario, because even when we talk about cyber attacks and all of these type of things, and most of the scenario is predicated that everything we back up and running tomorrow morning, don't worry about it. So I don't think people then think about, what if we are down for weeks, months, we're 18 months down the road, and it's something we've grown to live with. But arguably, what could happen? What's going to happen next? How can you go bigger? Because it is going to get bigger.
I sometimes think we shouldn't really ask an information security audience if you could imagine the worst thing. Like, can we go bigger? Because they really will do that.
Yeah.
And then we just have that devastation. I wondered whether you think that more people will be interested in the kind of business continuity, crisis management, even instant response side of things after this last dramatic year. Because I know that's a part where I've been told, I don't say I know, but I've been told before that that's an area that, they really struggle to recruit into. Do you think that the drama of it and the fact that a lot of, I'm going to say it, like information security people, a lot of us sort of did heroes work, really. I mean, a lot of the CISOs and things I've had on the show really kept things moving throughout the pandemic. So do you think it'll attract more people into that side of the business?
I hope so. Yeah, I think cybersecurity, I think over the last few years has just been a cost center. It's been a kind of a burden, let's say, to the business. And cybersecurity is always getting in the way and telling us we can't do this, can't do that. But I think it's really brought to the forefront just how critical security and privacy by design is, by design and by default. Because I think at the early days of the pandemic, it was very much around availability. How do we get people up and running as quickly as possible? Arguably, that was at the detriment to security and not going through the right controls and this, that, and the other. But slowly but surely, a lot of those kind of security controls have been relaxed to a certain extent, and we're seeing more people embracing sort of bring your own device and those type of things. Probably 18 months, 2 years ago, there would have been some sectors that would have just said absolutely no way can we have these type of people working from home, and there would have been a myriad of excuses about why that can't happen. And kind of all of those excuses to a certain extent have gone out the window, because you've kind of proven that you can work, and you can work securely without impacting productivity. So the two go hand in hand, really.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I mean, I think this goes into the next thing I was going to speak to you, because obviously you're very well known for being a big supporter of women and girls in this industry, and God knows it's still required. And that was what I was going to ask you, whether you think that the work from home experience will help or hinder progress in terms of the gender balance, because on the one hand, it has proven that so much can be done from home and therefore enable flexible working. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that's going to be a feature, or do you think that, on the other hand, I've heard a lot of business saying that's it, you come back to work, anyone who refuses is fired or whatever.
You know what I think that's really interesting is actually people will be walking and thinking and demanding things what comes next is in the hands of the employees and the consumers and what they want to happen. I think pre-pandemic, if you wanted to work from home, wanted flexible working, the onus was on you as the individual to have to explain why and how. Now I think it's almost the opposite way around. I think it's the onus on the company to explain why not, because we've proven it can happen. And I think, as you sort of say, I always look at where's the positive, where's the opportunity. So I think that the flexibility there is, and obviously, I think the 9 till 5, traditional 9 till 5, the daily commute, the daily grind into the office, is almost going to be a thing of the past. And I think for some people, they will want to go back to the office, they will want to do that, but it's not a necessity to have to do that. So you're quite right. The flexibility in terms of where, when and how you work is really important. But I've even seen, as we sort of said, a lot of companies even rethinking about what even device that you log on from, what location. I know we're talking about remote working and working from home, but it literally is work from anywhere on any device at any time. That's kind of where we're moving to. And it's kind of proven the point. And we can do that, particularly when we're talking about cloud infrastructure and that kind of stuff.
I mean, as well, that's going to pick up with our main topic a little bit later on digital identities and that move in perimeter service. So very definitely done there. Anyone would think you've done this before. But, you know, I just want to come, I mean, I had other things to ask you, but just to finish this, because it's so interesting to me that you've said that it's going to almost be up to the company to justify keeping people in the office from now. And you've always said, and you've said it in a few times, I was researching just to interview you because there was a million things I wanted to ask you, but you said that, you know, the next stage of recovery, the next stage of this whole thing, and really a digital transformation as a society, as a global society, is going to be led by the employees. And what that made me think is that on the one hand, that's brilliant. But on the other hand, I know that's going to strike fear into the hearts of a lot of security people, because it's going to be difficult to manage the risks of that. Alongside the obvious necessity. I mean, to me, it's just obvious that's how it's going to go. And I just wondered what your thoughts on that were as well, because you are always someone who advocates for employee-driven change.
Yeah, I think, as you said, you know, I've worked in business crisis management for a long time, and I kind of like an eternal optimist. So I'm always, where's the opportunity? Where do we go from here? But it's always about moving forward. There's no point moving backwards. So I think with everything, there's an amount and degree of risk, and that threat is continue to evolve. And I know that's something we're going to be talking about when you bring the other panelists on, just what's happened over the last year. But the threats, the risk isn't going away, but we have to kind of keep considering the what if and the maybe and the so what. So we have to kind of really think about, again, what's the worst case scenario, the severe but plausible. And then really test that. And I think when we talk about cyber attacks and these type of incidents, we've gone way beyond just a cyber response. We're talking about the business response, the wider crisis management, that cross-sector, and all of those things combined. And I think it's a really, really great opportunity and platform to elevate security right up to the top table, boardroom discussion. So I think if we take anything away, there's the opportunity right there.
Well, do you know, I think that's just fantastic advice. And I think just what a great mantra to live by is like, where's the opportunity in everything? Do you know what, Sarah? We could fill whole shows chatting to you. But I'm going to bring it in on the topic, and I'm going to look just in a second on our news topic on our panel. But before I invite them onto the stage, I just want to say welcome to all of our audience today, some of our regulars, a few people new, and to remind you that the most engaged comments or questions to us or any of the panel can win the teissTalk mug. Very sought after, Sarah, you know that, don't you?
Well, I didn't even have one, so I don't feel very privileged.
Sarah's not got a mug. Someone get a mug for Miss Armstrong-Smith. Thank you. Thank you.
Where's my flag? That's what I want to know. Yeah.
So we've got a few questions coming in already. We will try to get them in a moment. But before we do, I'd like to welcome my panel to discuss our news items. So first of all, we have Sebastian Avavare, who's the Information Security Manager at Canon, and Jason Sirocco, who's the CTO of PKI at Sector. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you?
Really good.
Thank you. Really good to be here.
So we're going to talk news first of all. And the news isn't, even though our teissTalk Al did require us to go into some detail as to what on earth happened to the internet today, apart from lots of sarcastic comments from the InfoSec community about switching it off and on again and someone unplugging, plugging in the Hoover in the room and all the rest of it. But I'm not going to talk about that. I want to talk about this open letter from the White House to private companies in the United States. An open letter to urgently act against the threat of ransomware. Initial thoughts. Let's go Sarah break for a minute. Initial thoughts, Sebastian.
No, that was quite an interesting move, and that came on the back of some additional announcements from the White House. And on the face of it, definitely looks like a good move, something to show that the government and the law enforcement agencies will start taking this more seriously and also hopefully offer more support. But being in security also means looking at what's the half empty of the glass, and it's going to be interesting how this is going to translate in practice in the future. It shows a lot of promise, but there's also a lot of potential for abuse. So it depends on how the tool is going to be used. I mean, we're talking about the same governments that keep advocating for weakening encryption, who are overstepping and over prosecuting. And if you remember the case of Aaron Schwartz from MIT a few years ago. So it can go either way. I do want to keep a positive outlook, but also looking for what will it mean in practice, and being on the other side of the pond, also looking what will it mean for the various agreements between privacy-based agreements like the Shield between the European and the American entities, and for being able to leverage American-based services from the EU space. There's going to be a lot of things to keep an eye on.
I mean, Jason, they speak about the sweeping danger of ransomware to the private sector. In case anyone missed the ransomware news, I suppose. But there's a little bit about why is it being done at the time. I mean, Neuberger, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but she is the advisor who wrote the letter, stated corporations and businesses have a distinct and key responsibility when it comes to America's cybersecurity. Is that a little bit, are they kind of pushing it back to the companies themselves, do we think? And kind of, is this a way of underscoring that to a certain extent you've got to look after yourself as well?
If you go all the way back to the Obama administration, General Hayden actually said very, very distinctly, their cavalry is not coming, which was the Obama's administration's way of saying enterprises need to deal with this themselves. And I think that was the wake-up call to this is a top-down problem, not just a bottom-up problem. In other words, don't just leave it as an IT cost center issue, which is the way I think a lot of C-suites were dealing with issues like this. Unfortunately, I think as important as it is for government at this level to be communicating out to enterprises, the problem is that at this point, it sounds an awful lot like a NIST guidance, which is extremely non-prescriptive. In other words, there's no tool sets being talked about here. That's probably the right decision to be made. The problem is, I think that the audience that doesn't get it yet won't get it unless they receive some sort of prescription about how to deal with this. Otherwise, a lot of this smacks a lot like, I think there's an insurance company in the United States that advertises a lot with a character called Captain Obvious. And I think that this comes under the category of, it's almost too obvious. And since there's no prescription, what was the value of it?
Do they do cybersecurity?
And when you see something that
insurance.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, with that being said, I think that this sounds a lot more like the government just trying to cover its own tail, so to speak. In other words, this is a new American presidency that is dealing with the same issues that the past 4 presidents have and still haven't really gotten to the main issue yet. And unfortunately, we're starting to see even critical infrastructure being dealt with in a very negative way because of sloppy attackers that who are even apologizing. It's unbelievable, isn't it? This ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline, for example, that those set of attackers actually had to apologize for what they did, not realizing it would have that level of an effect on such a fragile network. Anyway, interesting.
That was good of them, wasn't it, to apologize, Sarah? I mean, obviously, I'm really sorry that we caused so much destruction. I mean, what's your view on this letter, Sarah? I mean, you're speaking for yourself now, obviously, and I know there's certain things certain areas you can't go into, but I mean, it's one of the commentators in this says, a letter from the White House isn't going to change the game of the slightest, which I think was partly Jason's point. I mean, what's your view on it?
I don't know, because I think just before Christmas, Microsoft has really come out strong. And we said, we're going to go harder and stronger and really emphasize the point on ransomware, and particularly human-operated ransomware. And we've said, one of the things that we've come out with is a lot of let's be honest, it's organized crime. The criminal gangs that a lot of behind this. They're not opportunists. They're really looking at their targets. They're doing their reconnaissance. They're willing to play the long game as well. And they're really thinking about the value of the information, the data, and the willingness and desire to extort, and the willingness and desire that they're going to force them to actually pay. And I think that the concern of us really was that, even when we think about what's been going on over the last year, we said, surely you will not attack first responders. Surely you're not going to attack the hospitals. And they did, because it's more highly likely that you're going to pay if you're on the front line, if you're critical infrastructure. But I think the interesting thing that we're seeing is we're not just seeing extortion now. We're seeing that willingness to go that step further with disruption and destruction. So where's it going to end? So I think there is a real need to bring it to the forefront, but I also think it's potentially not helpful when you don't have a solution. And what do I do? Where's my priority? Where do I start? Because you're kind of setting a cat amongst the pigeons without any guidance about what to do next. So on one hand, I think it's really important that you have to raise the awareness. The second part of then is what help are you actually providing?
Yeah, I mean, that's what Jason was saying, wasn't it? It doesn't say what to do, just be aware of it. And also, it feels very blamey to me. And I think this is the problem with extortionware generally. Neuberger added that the impact of ransomware upon a company is directly linked to the company's attitude to the threat, which does sound an awful lot to me like it's kind of partly your own fault if you're not prepared and everything else. And I just don't know whether that's helpful. I mean, Sebastian, what's your thoughts on it?
It's basically trying to get into the mindset of the people behind this, and looking at the comment that we're sorry that we affected critical infrastructure or we affected hospital. I don't really buy it that they are so sorry. I think they're more sorry that they're trying to find what is that threshold where to impact systems which are critical enough to make it an urgency for the victim to pay because they need to restore something critical, but not that critical that governments and other stronger agencies will intervene in order to take measure. And I think they're feeling that with the open letter from the White House, as toothless as it is at the moment, they are feeling that I think we kind of stepped a bit over and we're beginning to shoot ourselves on the foot. At the end of the day, ransomware is financially driven. Ransomware has exploded when attackers have realized that they can make a lot of money out of it. There might be some of them state-backed actors, but most of it is pure financially driven, and that's what they care. How can they make the biggest bang for the buck without getting themselves too much in danger? And while the position of the White House in itself with the open letter doesn't seem to be too aggressive, I do link it to the presidential order. Was it from May 12th earlier this year, when there were actually some more specific measures being recommended, but they were directed primarily at the of course, the government agencies and federal entities, but they're also referring already to the supply chains for those agencies. They were directing in that executive order for the law enforcement agencies to be prepared to step in and to collect logs from victims, and which gives them some interesting powers there. Also directing directive towards NIST to come up with new recommendations, and that's something I think, Jason, you mentioned as well, that we might see some new stuff coming from NIST on the back of it. But purely on the attack, yeah, it's at the moment it doesn't feel like you have a lot of new options. It's still the same game. It's becoming a bit more escalated, but yeah, the companies are still responsible for their operations. Are they going to pay more attention to ransomware and to security mitigations because of the executive order? Because of the open letter? That remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, we've got lots of interesting comments on this. The ransomware talks we're going to run really. And we've got lots of people loving Jason's comments about Captain Obvious. We've got the Ministry of Silly Walks, the Ministry of the Obvious, the Journal of Irreproducible Results from Danny. There's one of our regulars. We've also got James saying, what about when criminal gangs move to damaging integrity, when they get bored of confidentiality, bored of availability? Damaging integrity, deepfake videos just around the corner. It won't just fall into the ban ransomware payments argument. So I think we're right to say that this is bigger than just ransomware. It's extortionware. Sarah's quite right. It's not just a ransom. It's moving now into destruction. Who knows where it will end? But we are going to end the discussion on that right now, because I know from experience that we can talk about that kind of forever. As Sebastian said in the preparation yesterday, that's about 5 hours worth of debate we could go into right there. So let's just have a look at a couple of the questions that have come in before we get onto our main topic. We've got quite a few questions coming in here. We've got one from Peter saying, surely it's not just about looking after ourselves, our organizations, but also helping and supporting and working collaboratively with partner and supplier ecosystems to raise their game as well. What a great question, Sarah. Can I come to you on that one? Because, looking at yourselves and the collaborations that you guys must have, I mean, that's surely right from Peter, isn't it? Collaboration's got to be key for all of this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think we had a kind of a moment of reckoning as well, which is on the back of the SolarWinds, we sort of said, actually, there's a lot of emphasis that has to be placed on government and to do more in terms of sanctions and holding a lot of these criminals to account, really. But also with regards to sometimes our hands are tied with regards to in sharing of intelligence. And we sort of said we need to get better at sharing. And not just sharing with government and other tech providers, but sharing more broadly, because the more information we can get out with regards to their tactics, their techniques, indicators of compromise, what things you should be looking for, how do you monitor, how do we get those updates out there, how do we keep people safe, all the better. And we can only do that when people are willing to share and share as broadly and as openly as possible. But I think this should not be something that's unique to only the big enterprises who can protect themselves because they've got more resource and capability. We do need to think about the global supply chain, and it's kind of brought it to the forefront with the pandemic. We are critically dependent on the SMEs. And we have a duty of care, therefore, to protect the SMEs, particularly, as we said, they don't have the resource, the capability, the knowledge, but they still have highly sensitive information and data. And they have to protect that as much as the large ones do. So we really have to think about, how do we lift the game, ultimately, I think, and make sure that we can get this advice and guidance and help out there as much as possible.
Jason, I did say I'll finish on this topic, but I'd just love to hear Jason's view on that. The collaboration's got to be key here to for the ransomware.
So, in terms of lessons learned, I honestly think that if we take it right back to the letter, you take it right back to what Microsoft can offer and others. Obviously, in the supply chain, that's where the biggest collaboration is going to be, is in your procurement. In other words, making sure that you're working with a security partner. If you're some sort of a general enterprise, I mean, even the biggest people in the world, like Lockheed Martin, for example, has some of the best security defenders in the world. Very few enterprises, even large ones, are ever going to get to that kind of level. So it's very important to be able to, your collaboration, in a sense, is about choosing a good security partner in your vendors and making sure that your procurement of your security controls and the software that you're using has that in mind. Those kinds of decision making typically don't happen from a bottom up, as I said earlier. A lot of those kinds of decisions really need to be made from the top down. In other words, from C-suite on down, the prioritization of, hey, this is not an IT problem. This is a risk issue for my enterprise. All the old ideas of I'm an underdog, nobody's going to come after me, my data is not worth anything to the bad guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those are the kinds of messages that as an industry we need to make over and over again. I definitely think that collaboration amongst your peers, I think, is already happening in some industries where it's important. In financial industry, they do that. I know that in oil and gas, they talk all the time. I think for everybody else, a lot of it should be driven through your procurement, which is probably something you might already have a lot of competence in. And, dealing with a Microsoft, dealing with, a Sectigo, for example, the companies that you're going to for your security, that I think is a way that a lot of enterprises might be able to lock on to the idea of a collaboration.
Absolutely. I think that's so true. And I think it was a great question, Peter. And it also puts us in mind of a future episode, which is going to be about the vendor-customer relationship. And we do talk about Co-Destiny, which is the official perfume of the teissTalk episodes. And you might want to win a mug by answering what that might smell of by finding it on mine and the teissTalk Twitter handle. Brilliant comments, as always, from our panel on that side of things. And now I'm going to get shot by the Teiss Elf if we don't get onto Zero Trust. and I mean, I think the first thing, as is so important in so many of these topics that we talk about, is really to define exactly what we mean by that. And I'm going to come to Sebastian first and ask you, what does it really mean in your eyes at the moment, Sebastian?
Zero trust and digital identity. Well, zero trust means a lot of things to a lot of people, but really, to take maybe a slightly different approach to it, it's a new version of assume breach. It's assume that the person that tries to log in into your system is somebody who has been compromised or has malicious intention, and you have to prove that they are who they are, that they are coming from the device, that they from a device that is trustworthy, and so on. And it's something that has grown over time, and we know the history. We transition from trusting the device, trusting the network, to now trusting the people and looking for ways to prove that trust. And it's something that has saved my own skin quite a few times, because by using this new technologies, by not just assuming that person who has the login name and the password, we just assume that only with those they are who they are. And well, never mind the fact that they are coming in from Cambodia, even though the previous 10 logins have been from London. That saved me a few nights of good sleep. And it's really something that cannot be, of course, adopted overnight. It's a process, and it's something that, to pick up on the topic from Jason, something has to come from a strategic level, has to come through the C-suite. We want to go in that direction, but it also has to be driven from the technical level, from the security team, by explaining what are actually the business benefits of it. Because we can talk among ourselves until the next week about how many technical benefits there are, how many security benefits there are, but what does it mean for the business? How do we translate those benefits into business advantage, either by a reduction of risk, or even better, by the possibility of doing new types of business? And I think from security, we don't use those arguments often enough. How we use zero trust and the new modern ways of collaboration to facilitate business relations with partners, of leveraging third parties, of even letting our people focus on what is the business of the company, and outsource some of the capabilities to the companies who can do it better. Because
I mean, I'm going to stop you there just a second, Sebastian, because just before we go too far off the definition side, because I know some of the things that you're going to say there that Sarah would definitely come in. Sarah, you said it's a collection of ideas and principles. You're going to pick up on what Sebastian says a little bit as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, exactly. So I think really, as you say, it's design principles and architecture decisions. So just to sort of echo what Sebastian was saying, I think the first one and most important one is assume compromise. It doesn't matter how good your defenses are, you have to assume that you are going to be breached. And therefore you've got to ask the so what if, if I am compromised, what's the impact? What could I do about it? The second one is then the principle of least privilege. And segregation of duty. So this is particularly about protecting those admins, because if we're talking about ransomware, for you to encrypt or extort or exfiltrate data, you need admin access and admin rights. And this is really around, we're going to get into the topic of identities in particular, but the identity part of zero trust is absolutely fundamental to everything. And the third part really is that explicit verification, as we sort of said. It's that just because someone has the right credentials, the right device, they're logging in from the right location, doesn't mean we trust it. But it's not just that initial log on as well. It's actually the verification while they're in session. So as much as we're talking about the external threat, we also have to consider the internal threat as well. And that being able, and I think ultimately it's all about how we manage risk and how much risk we're prepared to take. And therefore, what action can we take, and can we automate that action as much as possible, in a nutshell?
I mean, in a very concise nutshell, a very good nutshell. I mean, Jason, you'd. I know that least privilege was a lot of, you said people found that was to be too many syllables. They moved to zero trust. What are your thoughts on this as we stand at the moment on this whole area?
A lot of good things have already been said. So let's try to connect some of these ideas for a moment. Let's do a mental experiment here and think of what happens if we treated our internal corporate networks like the hostile public internet. That's a lot of what zero trust is forcing us to try to think about, because the bad guys have taught us that our internal network, the stuff behind the firewall, which for the past 30 years has been overly trusted. There's some sort of mental block about these perimeters, firewall being one, where if it's behind the firewall, it somehow can be trusted or should be trusted more than something that's on the hostile public internet.
Absolutely.
Well, first of all,
the same in physical. Just to come in and then let you continue after you hold that thought. But I was just going to say that's true on physical as well. If you've got a hard perimeter, the soft and heart of the business, they think it as well. It's a strange thing.
My goodness, that was true with the Maginot Line after World War I.
Absolutely.
These ideas of defense are that hard shell, soft core idea has always failed, no matter what form of security or defense has ever been created, period. Unfortunately, we're having to learn these same lessons in cybersecurity as well. So, in other words, this could be another 5 hours we could easily take off. I'm sure Sebastian, Sarah, and I could just go on and on. But this comes down to, the set of principles come down to, do the mental experiment in your own enterprise of, what would I do if I were treating my internal network like the hostile public internet? You're probably already doing that anyway when you're adopting the cloud, when you're adopting hybrid network models. In other words, you're having to traverse very sensitive intellectual property and data across hostile network boundaries. How are you dealing with that? You're probably dealing with that with some sort of TLS connection or legacy VPN. You're probably, and this is where the identity idea comes in, as soon as you're having to do stronger forms of authentication and encryption across those hostile network boundaries, you start to need things that you never used before. Things such as digital identities for nodes in places that you never used them in the past.
Yeah.
And therefore, you're dealing now with a management problem that has been solved in other areas, but have never been solved in a more generic sense.
No.
And that's where I think the world is going. That's why you see, if you were to Google right now, zero trust, it's going to mean a lot of things to a lot of people, as exactly what Sebastian said. The problem is, keep in mind that a lot of what the vendors are trying to bring to you is policy tools. That's one piece of the puzzle.
I mean, I'm going to come in there
one.
if I may, Jason, because we've only got about 5 minutes left now. I've got a couple more questions to ask, and I just thought that was a brilliant introduction into something that I know Sebastian wants to talk about, which is where governance fits in with all of this. And I was told very, firmly in our research yesterday that I needed to bring that in quite near the top. Now, we're given really good summaries, but Sebastian, if you could do sort of fairly succinctly, because we've not got long left and I've still got lots to ask you, where does governance fit into all of this? I think it leads on from what Jason was just saying, doesn't it?
Well, it comes in pretty much everywhere, from determining what is the direction and what is the tempo that we want to impose for the change. The governance comes in also in understanding what are the problems that zero trust and the digital transitions will not solve, and that's also something that's very important and often forgotten. Organizations go to, oh, let's do zero trust, let's adopt a multi-factor authentication, and there is, especially at the C-level and senior management, an expectation that, oh, this is a panacea, and no, it's not. And the role of the governance is to say, well, this will solve these problems, and like in a threat modeling exercise, these are the problems that will not be addressed by this particular solution, and this is what else we have to do. Governance also comes in play, indeed, for policy setting, for defining what is an identity, who is allowed from my company's perspective to be an identity in my network. What are the rules for the different type of identities? Because you will end up with, as more interconnected business, with different type of identities. I'll have my own employees, I'll have my technical outsource companies, I have my media agency who is allowed to do a lot of things and handle a lot of proprietary and intellectual property information. So what are those identities? And then moving to our back, defining the rules, and governance has to keep all those things together. Governance also has the very important role of quantifying both the risks and the costs of security towards the business, because security always thinks that the sky is falling, and that, at least that's how the business feels when they talk with us. But actually, we need to quantify and to bring it to dollar and euro value, so that business can do their role of saying, okay, now I get it. I'm mitigating this risk. I'm saving this much money, and it's going to cost me this much to do business securely in today's internet, because that is the cost of doing business.
But there's also the cost of, I mean, just to bring in, just as a couple of questions, but there's John in the Q&A has asked a question that's very interesting, which I just thought I'm just going to quick fire a few of them if we may. But there's the cultural resistance to it all as well, Sarah, isn't there? I mean, and John said the last Zero Trust webinar he attended, Zero Trust won't work, thinking of the legacy systems, the access, the enterprise. And that's something that I always think as well. People hate to have anything taken off them. We hate to be on the clock. So, you say, oh, you can have access, but you can have access for 20 minutes. That's all you need. Absolutely the least we need. So there's pushback for that, even though that's good practice, right?
Well, actually, Zero Trust is brilliant for productivity and to keep people online and doing what they're doing, because it's been dynamic to changing threat landscape. So it's not black and white, do I allow, do I block? It's actually monitoring the risk and how much risk we're prepared to take. So actually, for us to look at what's anomalous behavior, we need to know it's normal behavior for them type of users. And then if something looks a bit odd, what do we do? So you can block, or you can ask for re-authentication, and that verification, we can limit access. So actually, it's better for users because we keep them online, we keep them doing what they're meant to be doing, but on a safe and secure way. And that's how Zero Trust gives benefit to people.
I guess, but thank you. That was awesome. But I do that's something that we need to keep on telling them, and we need to make sure people understand that, because otherwise it looks like, it seems like very controlling behavior. I think it is really the point that we're trying to make. So I had so much to ask you. Can I just get all three of you just to think for a little minute just about some very quick, last thoughts on this topic, because obviously we run out of time very quickly on this show. We've got a very engaged audience. So I've got a couple of questions here. We've got a great question from Frixos asking how a digital identity is able to help. Sounds like there's a threat inside and outside of the organization. Very quickly, Jason, it's inside and outside, right?
It absolutely is. Knowing where a message or instruction is coming from and know where it's going to, very important. And that comes directly from a concept of digital identity. Keep in mind, though, of course, that the protection itself of digital identity is a whole other topic that's important in the industry right now. But that whole idea of treating things as hostile until proven otherwise is a big important key to this.
Assume compromise, Sarah. Always assume compromise. That's what she says all the time. Couple of other things. We've got John T saying the tenure of an InfoSec leader is so short. Anyone embarking on Zero Trust needs to know that it will continue with their organisation beyond them and needs 100% board buy-in. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. We also had, I just think before we come to your final thoughts, all three of you on this very quickly, we had a great comment. It was in the questions, but it was a great comment from Neil saying, will COVID lead to more futurologists being employed, particularly by multinationals? I mean, what a great idea. I think it probably will, won't it? So let's come to some final questions, final thoughts. Sebastian, let's go to you first. Very quickly, some final thoughts on digital identity, Zero Trust, and this whole huge topic that we are going to come back to in the future on teissTalk.
And because it's such a big change, it's important to explain to the organization, not just to the C-suite, but also to the people in the organization, why are we doing it? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And to show the cases where security can fail, and to show how easy it is to break security. My favorite party trick is whenever we had a long time ago on-site meeting with management teams, I was always bringing my lockpicking set for lunch, and I was teaching senior managers in 5 minutes to do lockpicking, and then the wheels start spinning. And so security is not hacking is not some magic skill that somebody has or doesn't have when they're born. It's something that can actually be learned, and anybody can learn how to break into stuff. Okay, so that's why we need security, because there's a systematic approach to it. And just talk about what's the problem you're trying to solve for security, explain it to the people, and they will be much more willing to embrace that change.
Thank you, Sebastian. Sarah, final thoughts.
Just to kind of go full circle back to ransomware. So for ransomware to work, they need to elevate privilege, and they need to actually move across the network to exfiltrate data. So actually, we have to protect the admins. The admin protection, that verification is so important and so critical. So I'm going to say one thing: protect the admins with MFA as well.
Protect the admins at all costs. Hold on. Jason, last thoughts on this whole topic.
Yeah, I tell you what, I think we've covered a lot today, but with actionable things right now, figure out what your crown jewels are. I think that's a question I think a lot of the larger organizations have handled fairly well. I think some of the medium and smaller guys that really haven't thought through this much. In fact, that letter that we talked about from the White House is probably addressing some of the smaller players who might think that they're an underdog and their data is not worth something. It is. And when you consider a topic like big data, something we haven't talked about in this session, your data combined with a lot of other breached data is worth something. You might not realize it. It's not just fraud against you. Your data is worth something. So therefore you are a target. Therefore you do need to be thinking about these things. So I think we talked earlier about, how do you start to engage in that? Talk to a security partner, get involved. Don't just watch these headlines from the sidelines going, when's it going to be me? I think that the time to start is right now.
I think that's a brilliant note to end on, and I think it picks up on everything that we've spoken about today, including, and I'm going to reward this week's teissTalk mug to Peter for that excellent question on collaboration that all three of our wonderful panelists have picked up on today. I want to say thank you to Sarah Armstrong-Smith. Mug for Massage Smith, please. We can't have Sarah not having a mug. She gets one by default. And to Sebastian Avavare and to Jason Sirocco. And this edition of teissTalk was brought to you by Set2Go as our sponsor, and by the smell of Co-Destiny, your relationship with your suppliers. I want to say thank you to the audience for all their collaboration, and to our wonderful teissTalk elf who's been on the ball as ever today. We'll see you on Thursday with Jeff White's show, but for now, thanks so much for joining us, and see you next time on teissTalk. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.